On July 20, 1969, over 600 million people, roughly one-fifth of every human being alive on Earth, stopped whatever they were doing and stared at a television screen. That number is staggering. But here is the part that most people never consider: what happened in the hours and years that followed. That broadcast quietly rewired the entire modern world in ways we still do not fully understand today. Welcome to History Vault YT. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover exactly how a single mission to the moon did not just win a space race, it permanently altered medicine, technology, geopolitics, and the way human beings think about their own existence. And there is one consequence of the moon landing so counterintuitive, so unexpected, that most history books skip right past it. Stay with us, because we are going to get there. To understand why the moon landing changed everything, you have to understand the world it landed in. The year was 1969. The Cold War was not just a political rivalry, it was an existential crisis. The United States and the Soviet Union had been locked in a terrifying standoff for over 2 decades. Both nations possessed enough nuclear weapons to end human civilization several times over. The space race was not really about space. It was about proving which system, capitalism or communism, could push human capability further. It was propaganda measured in rocket fuel. The Soviets had been winning. They launched the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. They sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit in 1961. The United States was consistently playing catch-up, and the psychological damage to American confidence was enormous. President John F. Kennedy understood this. In 1961, he stood before Congress and made one of the most audacious promises in political history: the United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. At that moment, NASA did not yet have the technology to do it. No one did. Kennedy was betting the reputation of an entire nation on a goal that engineers said was barely possible. What followed was an effort so massive it is almost incomprehensible. At its peak, the Apollo program employed over 400,000 people. It consumed roughly 4.4% of the entire United States federal budget, equivalent to over $280 billion in today's money. Entire industries were invented from scratch. New materials were developed, new manufacturing processes were created, and a generation of engineers were pushed to the absolute edge of what human minds could solve. The pressure was not abstract. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee died in a launch pad fired during a training exercise in 1967. The risk was real. The stakes were life and death, and yet the program continued. On the morning of July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were aboard. For days later, Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the lunar surface in the Eagle lander while Collins orbited above. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Time, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon and spoke the words that 600 million people heard crackling through their television speakers. The mission lasted just over 8 days total. Armstrong and Aldrin spent roughly 2.5 hours on the surface. But what those 2.5 hours set in motion would echo through decades. But here is what nobody talks about. The moon landing did not just inspire people, it created technology that saved lives. The miniaturized electronics developed for the Apollo guidance computer directly accelerated the development of integrated circuits, which became the foundation of every modern computer, smartphone, and medical device on Earth. The Apollo program essentially force-fed the semiconductor industry a decade of innovation in just a few years. Without Apollo, the personal computing revolution likely happened later, perhaps significantly later. The medical applications are even more extraordinary. NASA's need to monitor astronaut health remotely led to the development of wireless patient monitoring systems. Techniques developed to enhance lunar photographs gave doctors better tools for analyzing medical imagery. Memory foam, originally developed to protect astronauts during crashes, now fills millions of mattresses and hospital beds worldwide. Scratch-resistant lenses, water purification systems, and even the technology behind modern CAT scanners all trace partial lineage back to problems NASA engineers were trying to solve between 1961 and 1969. The numbers tell a compelling story. A 1992 study found that for every dollar invested in the Apollo program, roughly $7 to $9 were returned to the economy through spin-off technologies and innovations. That is one of the most extraordinary returns on a government investment in the history of public spending. And yet the moon landing is still primarily remembered as a moment of national pride rather than the engine of practical innovation it actually was. The geopolitical consequences were equally profound. The landing did not end the Cold War, that would take another 2 decades, but it fundamentally shifted the balance of psychological power. The Soviet Union never officially conceded the space race, but internally their moon program collapsed. The N-1 rocket, their answer to the Saturn V, failed in 4 consecutive test launches. By the early 1970s, the Soviets had quietly abandoned their lunar ambitions. American dominance in space became a cornerstone of the argument that democratic, market-driven societies could outperform centrally planned ones in the most demanding arena imaginable. This matters because the moon landing shaped how dozens of newly independent nations, many emerging from colonial rule in the 1960s, chose to align themselves politically and economically. When the world watched an American astronaut plant a flag on another world, it was a statement about what the American system could achieve. The soft power generated by Apollo 11 was incalculable, and historians largely agree it influenced the geopolitical alignments of the following decade in ways that conventional military and economic pressure could not have achieved alone. Then there is the philosophical dimension, and this is the one that is hardest to quantify but may ultimately be the most significant. Before July 20, 1969, human beings had looked at the moon from a distance for the entire span of recorded history. Every civilization, every religion, every poet, every child who ever lived had gazed upward at that object and understood it as forever unreachable. The moon landing shattered that boundary permanently and replaced it with something terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, the idea that no boundary is permanent. The famous photograph known as Earthrise, taken during Apollo 8 in December 1968, showed our planet as a small, fragile, luminous ball floating in absolute darkness. Many historians of the environmental movement point to that photograph as one of the catalysts for a surge in ecological awareness that produced the first Earth Day in 1970, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and a global conversation about planetary stewardship that continues to this day. From space, the divisions between nations disappeared. What remained was a single, vulnerable world. That image changed how millions of people thought about where they lived. The Apollo program officially ended in 1972, with Apollo 17 being the last crewed lunar mission. 12 human beings have walked on the moon. None have done so in over 50 years. But the shadow of those missions stretches forward across everything. The International Space Station, the Mars rovers, the Hubble Space Telescope, commercial space ventures like SpaceX and Blue Origin, all of them exist in a world that Apollo convinced humanity was possible. Elon Musk has cited the moon landing as a formative inspiration. Generations of scientists, engineers, and explorers chose their careers because of what they saw on a grainy black and white television screen in 1969. The lesson of the moon landing is not simply that ambition pays off. The deeper lesson is that civilizations are transformed not just by what they build but by what they dare to attempt. The 400,000 people who worked on Apollo were solving problems nobody had solved before, under conditions nobody had experienced before, toward a goal that had never been achieved in human history. The knowledge generated by that pressure did not stay in space. It filtered down into hospitals and factories and living rooms and changed the texture of ordinary life in ways those engineers never specifically intended. The moon is still up there, the same as it has always been. But the way humanity looks at it, the way we look at ourselves, is different now. And that difference, quiet and enormous, is perhaps the most enduring legacy of those 2.5 hours on a grey, silent surface 250,000 miles from home. Before you go, if you learned something new today, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe to History Vault YT for a new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.